Hi, folks. This lesson is how to structure any speech. And the good news is we're going to learn this outline format, and it will be the same format that you're going to use for all of the speeches that we give in this course. So, as soon as you learn the format, you'll be able to organize any kind of formal speech that you need to give. There is a handout that is a blank template that has the labels for each part of a speech, and it's one that we'll return to frequently throughout the summer. So when you're giving a speech, you want to start with an introduction. And think of a speech for our class kind of like you would a 5-paragraph essay. You're going to have an introduction and a conclusion, which are 2 of your paragraphs, and then you're going to have 3 body paragraphs typically in between. So your introduction, you want to start with some kind of hook or attention grabber. You want to get your audience's attention. And just like in an essay, you could start with a surprising statistic, a quote from somebody famous, a short anecdote. Maybe you tell a joke. Although if you're going to do that, I would caution you just to make sure that you know the joke is funny. You might want to get some outside input on that before you try it. Then the second part is going to be the link or the background. And this is the transition between the hook and your thesis statement to connect them. You want to give some background information about the topic of your speech, and it's going to show the relationship between whatever opening you had and what the topic of your speech is about. And then that'll move you into your thesis statement. So just like in an essay, you need to have some kind of a statement that tells your audience what you're going to be talking about. And then finally, you're going to preview the main points of your speech. So in the body, if you've got 3 things that you're going to talk about, you'll say in the introduction, I'm going to talk about 3 things, this, and this. And then in the body, you move into explaining each of those 3 things in turn. But because it's harder to listen than it is to read, and when you're giving a speech, the audience can't rewind or read it again. They've got to get it all the first time you say it. You need that preview at the front end so that the audience kind of knows where you're headed, and it's easier for your audience to follow along. So that's the purpose of the preview. Even though we're talking about short speeches here, you want to let your audience know where you're going. So then we go to our body, which are like our body paragraphs in an essay. And you're going to make 3 main points. And each main point is going to be essentially a claim that supports your thesis. And for each claim, you want to have some kind of supporting material. That supporting material might be research that you've done. Later on in the summer, we're going to do speeches that require you to do some research. It could be a personal example that supports the thesis, something that you know just from your own experience. And then you're going to explain how that example or that data that you found proves your thesis in your own words. How does it relate to your main point? And so for each main point, you want to have at least a couple of examples. I would say 2 to 3 examples would be enough. You want to have adequate information to actually prove what you're talking about and to convince your audience that you know what you're talking about and that you're believable and credible. So you'll do the same thing for your second main point and your third main point. And we call that the rule of 3. Long ago, way back in ancient Greek times, people who studied rhetoric determined that the magic number was 3, and that the most persuasive arguments and speeches had three main points, three things that supported them. So often you'll hear people use phrases that include three nouns. Our speeches are going to include three main points, but that is the magic number for being persuasive. It's enough to prove your point, but not so many that your audience can't remember what you're talking about and follow along with you. And then finally, you'll have your conclusion. And you want to remind your audience in the review of what your main points were. So at the beginning, you had the preview where you said, here are the three things I'm going to talk about. This, and this. Then in the body, you explained each one of those 3 points, gave your supporting details for each one. And now in the conclusion, you're reminding your audience, here are the 3 things that I just told you about. This, and this. And again, that's because your audience can't rewind and review what you said. They can't reread it as if you wrote an essay. So you've got to do that piece for them. You're reminding the audience of your 3 main points. And then the final thing in your speech is going to be the tag. And this is your last thought. It brings your speech to a close. Ideally, it will refer back up to your hook. So if you started off with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in your hook, then your tag is going to refer to Dr. King as well. One thing that you should never ever do in a speech is finish by saying, in conclusion, blah, blah, blah. Or even worse is ending by saying, I'm done, or that's all I've got, because those items make you sort of undermine the credibility of everything that you've said. Those are not good ways to end your speech. So end with the tag and then close your mouth and wait for the applause. So that's all there is to it in terms of the structure of a speech. We're going to practice that structure this week in a very short speech that has no audience. And I'll explain the assignment in a separate video. But I do want to address the methods of speech delivery. And there are 4 different types of ways of delivering speeches. The first is the manuscript method. And that's here on our grid. And that's where you're writing out a speech word for word and then reading it. You've planned it ahead of time. You're using a script. And if you're on the debate team, this is what you would do with your debate case. You would type it up and then you would read it. That's not what we're doing in this class. Okay? The next item over here on the right is the memorized method of speech delivery. And this is also planned ahead of time, but you're not using notes. You've typed up your manuscript, written it out word for word, and then you've memorized it. And so you're reciting your speech from memory. And this is what actors do. They have to memorize a script word for word. We're not going to do this either. It takes a long time. And frankly, it's not very natural sounding unless you are a really good actor. So then underneath here, you'll see there's impromptu. And this is with no notes, no planning ahead of time. You're delivering a speech on the spot, right off the top of your head. And an example of this would be if a teacher calls on you in class and says, hey, what's the answer to this question? And you just have to start talking. That would be an impromptu speech. So we're not going to do that either. That's kind of terrifying and would be really hard to do and to do well. So we're going to come over here to extemporaneous. And extemporaneous speaking means that you've prepared an outline, you know what you're going to say, you've done some preparing ahead of time, but you're choosing your words on the spot. Your word choice is spontaneous. And so this is what teachers do. Um, I have given this lecture a bunch of times, usually, well, always in front of a group of people, not to my laptop. So this part's a little bit weird, but I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm going to say in general. I know what the information is that I need to convey, and I know what order I'm going to do it in. But every time I do it, it's a little bit different because I'm choosing my words on the spot. So I've prepared beforehand, but I'm not reading off a script because you may say to yourself, gosh, this is really boring, but you can't even imagine how boring it would be if I just read it word for word off a script, or if I had memorized a script and recited it the same way every time, like a little teacher robot. So extemporaneous speaking is what we're going for in this class. You will have time ahead of time to prepare. You'll have an outline for your speech using that format that we just looked at, and you'll have an opportunity to practice. But you're not going to write out a whole speech and read it, and you're not going to write out a whole speech and then have to memorize it. You're going to prepare the items that you want to talk about. You're going to practice it on your own time a few times so that you know generally what you're going to say. And then when you deliver your speech, it's going to be a little different from the times that you practiced. You're going to be choosing your words on the spot, and that makes it a lot more conversational. It makes your audience a lot more likely to listen to you because you sound more natural. And you also sound more credible because you sound like you know what you're talking about. And you can sound more like you care what you're talking about because we're going to want to talk about things that we actually care about. And we want to convey that feeling to our audience so that hopefully they'll care about it too. So, again, if you have questions, please let me know in an email or by joining my office hours on Google Meet, and we can talk over any of these things. We can look at the outline together. And for this assignment, there's not anything written that you have to submit. You just need to click the submit button to show that you watched the video, and you get the points. All right, thanks, guys.